There we go. Now you can hear me. There we go. Unmute. Yes. I don't know what was going on there. And my, I thought I was in studio mode. I wasn't in studio mode, so it's absolute chaos. But look, hey, once again, it's hello and welcome to this live session with me, the technologically, completely and utterly incompetent. I apologize for today's show being slightly late, but as you may or may not know, I have been feeling rather under the weather. You can now hear me, I hope. Let me just do this and that, but you can hear. Can you all hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yay, audio. I see the Cardboard Lord says there's still no audio. Do you have audio? Please tell me you have audio. I hope you have audio. Not yet at the Board Lich. Your perspiration tells a story. It always does, about running and temperature and all those kinds of things. I am feeling better, thank you. So I'm glad that I'm glad that you can hear me now. Before you start your stream of questions, please remember to preface your question with the word in caps lock question, otherwise I won't see it, and also save it, please. So do that. We're only going to do an hour-long show today, simply because I have been told by the doctor that I should not try and overdo it. So we're only going to go for another hour or so. So we're going to do just a few bits and bobs here, as we normally do. The reason why I keep going in this cycle of voice loss is because not only do I have bacterial tonsillitis, which is absolutely horrific, that's causing the voice to go all over the place, but I also have a viral cold, which has been going around Japan. The doctors couldn't work out why I kept getting sick, and then they discovered, ha, you've got both virus and bacteria. So the antibiotics were not helping against the virus, of course, and that was just helping everything go round and round and round and round in circles. So there we go. We are now back on track, and some new medication has been issued, and hopefully we will be 100% next week. So the videos will return. You may have noticed we didn't have any videos this week as well. So those will now return. All right, so we've got pretty much only, like I said, we've only got an hour today. I followed doctor's orders fairly religiously. Let's have a look here and see what we've got to do. YouTube videos to watch. I'm going to skip that this week. I've been man down, so there's not a huge amount of things that I have been watching, to be perfectly honest with you, but I will come back to you. Mark Khalil, I see your question there. I'm going to come to you when I take this away. Creative writing development, we can do that if we like. We will definitely be doing a review of the Karos Stones. So if you are here for the Karos Stones, we're going to do that on the hour. So it's past now. On the hour, we will do Karos Stones and finish off with that, because I think that's what a lot of people are here to see. Random questions, or random chaos, I should say, that's definitely coming from you guys. So make them happen. Okay, so let's go to the first question. Mark Cahill asked the question, how do you make low-level magical items interesting, yet not overpowered? And these are for level 2 to 3 characters. Well, if you look at level 2 to 3 characters, this is in Dungeons and Dragons, but generally in almost all games that have got some kind of leveling system, some sense of escalation, levels 2 and 3 are when the characters are no longer able to be killed by a single house cat, but now are able to actually take on a little bit more combat. So the magical items, I feel, need to be here more utilitarian than, oh, you can just hit better. The challenge is if you give them magical items that allow them to improve their damage or their hit options, all that you're doing is requiring yourself to give them bigger monsters, which also hit back. So unless the magical item is also enhancing their health and their ability to avoid that damage, you're creating a rather difficult situation where if the players don't kill the NPCs will kill the characters. So you don't want to do that. I go for things that are much more utilitarian. A sword that glows with a 60-foot radius of light on command. Robes that keep you dry in rain. Things like that, where there isn't an apparent massive benefit, but there are small ones. Social benefits, too, are often overlooked, and something that a lot of people don't consider, I certainly do though, is that NPCs can be looked at as magical items. If you've got an NPC who repairs your armor every time you come into town, free of charge, that's a pretty good boon. You've suddenly got this ability to repair armor, sell it for a better price, but also it's only in the town, you have to take it to the town. So I look at it in those two different ways, and that's how I kind of balance it out. Okay, so that was the first question. Great question. I like that one. Yes, so that was Mark Khalil there. Bacterial tonsillitis, followed by an influenza virus, is not very nice. No, not at all. Absolutely. When it rains, it pours. Yeah, I generally like to get sick so that I'm absolutely properly sick. Anyway, you're heading off to Monty Python. That sounds awesome. The Duke of Doom. Have fun. Enjoy that, definitely. Tactical Bacon, you're new to the show because I haven't seen your name before, so please remember to put question in caps at the front of your sentence. Otherwise, I will miss it. How do you incorporate a new NPC mid-campaign? It is always difficult. I have done some videos on the YouTube channel of exactly how to do this, how to bring in a PC in mid-game, and how to make that PC feel as if they are part of the group, because I think that's often one of the biggest challenges, is that The new PC comes in, they've got these new skills, they've got these new powers, but they don't have the history that the group has. So I always try and look at, if this person is joining, how can I give them history with the group straight away? So generally, I try and make the adventure where the new, where the new PC is introduced, I try and make that as memorable an occasion as possible, and one where everybody's involved and it's a life or death situation. So it's a really fine edge, everyone survives, and that kind of builds that camaraderie, which so often is missing. It's also important to make sure that that new PC is going to fit with the group. I've learned that lesson many times, and it can be very difficult if they don't. So watch out for that. Ryan Douglas, your question. Do you think the Warlock is too limited on spell slots? Been trying to work something out with my players. The Warlock certainly does seem to have a limited range of spells at their disposal, and Eldritch Blast is almost a given. I mean, yeah. So I would need to look at the Warlock class in closer detail, and it is something that I'm thinking of doing, is trying to unpack these things from that sort of perspective. But again, I think that the important question to ask is not, do I think, is it overpowered or is it limited? I think the question to ask is, how does that translate into a unique or interesting character? In the Kara Stones, the Warlock, well, yes, Eldritch Blast was basically their go-to power that they used throughout the entire campaign, but by no means would I ever have said that Draxus was a limited character or someone who had limited access to spells. I do believe it is very much based on how you play that character. Potentius asks, how do you handle shops and shopping with your party? Do you prepare? I used to prepare, and something that I have done, and you will see that I am going to be doing in the Campaign Creator series, which is that series that comes out, I think, on Friday nights, that I do where I am preparing an entire campaign from scratch. One of the things that I do is that I do design maps of generic cities, or at least not cities, of generic towns. And I sometimes have maps for specific buildings within those towns. So I'll have a smithy, I'll have a general goods store, I'll have a tavern or two, I'll have a shrine or a temple. So I'll have those maps pre-made, generic maps. Now, a lot of people go, oh, but it's a generic map, you can't use it in the next town. Well, actually you can. Most of the time, a lot of these structures were built by the same carpentry teams, the same masonry teams, on the same plans or on similar plans. So unless you're going to a different race, where of course, yes, then you need to change it up a little bit. Generally speaking, you can get by with modifying a map slightly. If you're not going to give the map to the players, if you're going to describe the map to them and they're going to kind of map it out on graph paper, then you're free to use that base map to then ad lib. Now, when it comes to shopping, shopping is always a painful experience, or at least it always seems to be a painful experience. And the main question you need to ask is, does everybody want to go shopping, or is it just one or two individuals? If it's one or two individuals, I hand wave and I say you can purchase whatever you like from the player's handbook, non-magical items, at cost. So whatever's listed in the book, that's what you can buy it here from. You two go off and buy that. The rest of the party, you're going to go to the tavern, you're going to go and listen for rumors, etc., etc. If everybody, however, wants to go shopping, then I turn it into an experience. And I start to think of what are the exciting things that one can have, one can incorporate into your shopping space to make it interesting. Now, there's a module that's coming out at the end of this month for all of the Patreon members at the highest tier, at the $15 tier. In that module, there's a market scene, and spoiler alert, so if you're going to be playing that module, listen away, look away, listen away. In that market, they stumble across an old fishmonger's, and in that fishmonger's, there is an undead flying squid, which will attack them. It's a little thing, it's not very big. Doesn't do very much damage, but it's certainly terrifying to have this undead tentacled squid coming out at you. So you can throw in those kinds of moments and events, as well as just the usual shopping and haggling and bartering that often goes with the shopping thing. Tacklin asks, how do you handle a group that can't be bothered with reading the material? Forgotten Realms won't read anything on it nor take notes. Well, as far as I'm concerned, Tacklin, that is a phenomenal opportunity for you to be able to create your own campaign world. Oftentimes players don't want to read material. It's so daunting. If you look at Forgotten Realms has been going for 30 years in terms of accumulating just so many different cultures and lore and racial things, and it's not the same name as it is for Greyhawk or for Ravenloft, and sometimes it is so daunting, so overpowering that you just go, you know what, I'm going to create my own campaign world, because then there is nothing for you to read. We're making this up as we go along, and what you do is you make the notes. You keep track of, well, you stumble into a halfling village, and as you explore it with your players, and there's ways and means. Again, if you look at my Campaign Creator series, which comes out on Friday nights, I'm talking about doing exactly those kinds of things. You have generic ideas, big sort of whitewash ideas, and then you refine those as your players go through them. You make notes on that refinement, and suddenly you end up with this amazing world, which when your players come back to for the second campaign and the third campaign, they don't have to read the material. They know the material because they helped create it. And it will also make it feel like a much more comfortable world for them to play in, because they have actually been there before in a different PC form. So that is definitely a way of doing that. Don't try and force people to read material that they're not interested in. It will not happen, and all you're going to do is get frustrated. Paul Cornett asks the question, what are some tips for Lovecraftian style horror? I've been trying to run a D&D 5th edition game with lots of Lovecraftian elements, but I feel like I've been underwhelming so far. This is the big challenge that you have with Lovecraftian horror, is that Lovecraftian horror, you say that it's been underwhelming so far. The biggest issue with Lovecraftian horror, of course, is that the big horror is usually so overwhelming that there is no ways that the PCs can overcome. Now, when you then start to look at then, okay, so what is Lovecraftian horror? That's the slow realization that the normal world is not absolutely normal. There is something weird going on. The challenge that you have when you're playing in something like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is that you have weird stuff everywhere. So to make something feel unusual makes it quite difficult. It's not to say you can't do it. PCs isolated from support, isolated from help, in the middle of marshlands where something is stalking them, something is lurking out there, and every now and again it makes an attack, but it doesn't really get seen. It's only a large tentacle which comes out of the darkness and then it disappears. I would then play on the senses. I would say that you hear the sound of its feet dragging across the cobblestones or whatever it is, wherever it is, but you don't see it. So try and play with your senses. I did a video many moons ago now, many years ago as a matter of fact, on horror and how to make something horrific and really drive home those points by using all of the senses that you have at your disposal. So I would definitely refer to that video. It's much more comprehensive than the answer that I'm giving you now. Lovecraftian horror is about the tone. It's about the mood before the beast is discovered. Once the beast is discovered, usually it's all over. Finley Duncan then asks the question, my playgroup only enjoys playing for an hour at a time. Do you have any tips for how to make the most of the time and still have combat and story? Well, if you have a look at this book, which I'm going to punt because, well, I wrote it and lots of people have said that they really like it. If you have a look at this book here, The Complete Guide to Creating Epic Campaigns, this is a book that I wrote last year. You can get it on our website, www.greatgamemaster.com, if you want the PDF version. If you want the hardcover version, you can head on over to www.blurb.com, where you can pick up the hard copy version. The PDF is $7.50. The hard copy will set you back around about $50 with shipping. Now, in that, there is actually an equation that you can work out for how long combat is going to take, and it's really dependent on the number of players you have, as well as a little bit of a niggly factor of how fast your players are to respond. If you're running out of time, and I suspect you are, for playing for only an hour is a very short time frame, you're looking at having one combat. You could possibly squeeze in two if you're lucky, and that's with an average size party. And that doesn't leave a lot of time for story. So what I would also do is very much, again, in the book, we talk about 4 different types of adventures. And I would make sure that each of those hours maybe not is a different type of adventure, but If you're going to do an adventure, you can block it out into 4 hours, and you can say, okay, in this 4 hours, in this hour, we're doing part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. That is definitely a thwarting adventure. Next one is then a discovery adventure. So your different hours, each 4 hours is going to feel very different from the previous 4 hours. That might help with that as well. So there's something to contemplate. Grant W says, there is a player in a game I am in that consistently rolls 26s. How do I find out if he's fudging without blatantly calling him out? Well, it depends on what type of system you're playing. Pathfinder 2 rolling a 26 is going to be everyday humdrum. Pathfinder 1, Dungeons & Dragons, 26 does seem to be very high. That's someone who's got a +6 modifier if they're rolling 20s, 7 if they're rolling 19s, and so on and so on and so on. So compare them to your own numbers. You can get numbers up into that range. Sometimes you can get a 26 if you're really lucky. But if it's consistently that high, something that you can certainly do, and this gets done on YouTube all the time, is every time they roll one, just make a little note on a piece of paper. And at the end of the session, you can say, good grief, do you know, Rodney, that of the 20 rolls that you made in this game, you didn't fail a single one, and not a single one of them was below 20? How amazing is that? Can I use your dice next game? Make them aware that you are aware. Now, this might not necessarily help. I had a friend of mine who was a pathological cheater. There was just no other way to describe it. And what they would do is they'd roll a d20, and before it had finished rolling, they would pick it up and flip it with their finger and thumb to then look at the number that they were hoping for, and would be able to roll it sufficiently that they could find a higher number. We would call that person up. We'd say, come on, what are you doing? And they'd go, no, I know, I'm sorry. And then they'd roll the dice once, normally, and then they would roll again and they'd pick up. So what you can do is, and assuming you're sitting around a table as well, is that you can suggest that you guys switch over to a dice rolling app, although that's probably not going to work. People like to roll real dice. But yeah, I would keep track of it firstly, and then I would approach your GM and say, listen, are you aware that this is the case? Is this just me? I would always go to the other party members and ask them as well. If that is the case, then I'm afraid you do need to call them out. They're not going to change, not going to stop. And it does sound like they are ruining the game. I mean, why cheat on an imaginary game in the first place? It's pathetic. Okay, EMP asks, how do you deal with burnout while playing Dungeons and Dragons? This was a very, very personal question. If I look at my average week, I run the Windswift Adventures of the Windswift on a Sunday night. I run the Broken World Chronicles on a Tuesday. On a Monday, I play in the After Dark show. Now, that's only once every 2 weeks, admittedly. I then do Kairos Stones, which is now changing into something else. And then I have a private game that I run for a single one-on-one player, again, also only twice a month. So I'm running 5 games a week, as well as then, writing modules and things for the Patreons and things. And that to me is a lot of role playing. It's my job. It's my full-time occupation. So I don't have any grounds to gripe. But there is definitely a time where you go, oh, it's just so much. It's too much. So how do you avoid burnout? Well, the best solution I can offer is that you need to find what inspires you in the game that you're currently running. And if it's not happening, if you go, oh, I really wanted it to be this kind of game and it's become that kind of game, drag it to becoming the kind of game you want it to play, you want it to be. Don't be afraid to change course. Bring stuff in that you like. Make sure that you're happy playing the game, and I think that the burnout will then subside to a certain degree. There are alternatives. You could request that somebody else GMs. I know a lot of groups, you go, oh, can someone else GM next session? And nobody wants to do it. It does also happen, without a doubt. Also, sometimes you can say, hey guys, can we do board games this week? Let's try board games. Let's watch a movie together. You can watch a D&D themed movie. Just don't watch the D&D movies. I would suggest you watch something like Willow, for example. That's a much nicer show. But yes, definitely it does happen, and you need to find what works for you. For me, certainly with these 5 games busy running, 2 of the games are set in the same universe, so that makes it easier to run. I don't really have to think about what's happening in the worlds too much. I just let the players kind of do what they want to do. Chaos Stones was, I would say, arguably the most intensive because I had the most amount of prep work to do, which still wasn't a huge amount of prep work. And then as a player, there is prep work for playing, and I would hate anyone to say, oh, player, you don't have to do any work. There's lots of prep work if you're a player. So, yeah, trying to mix it up, sometimes being a GM, sometimes being a player, that can also help as well. Okie dokes. Now, let's see, where are we? So that was that one. Andrew C. said, did you know that the University of British Columbia is running a survey on music in RPGs and is looking for survey participants? Andrew C., I did not know that. I would be happy to participate. I love music and RPGs, and so, yeah, if you've got a link there, share it with us. Do I have to publicly release it? I might have to do that if you've already shared it, because YouTube is like that. What I would suggest you do, Andrew C., is jump onto the Discord links, and hopefully someone can put the Discord link up for me. That will get you 50 experience points. If you can put a Discord link up there, Andrew, you can just go and drop that in the Green Dragon channel. I'm sure you'll get lots of people who want to participate there on that, because it's always fun to do surveys. I think I like it. I like it. Okie dokes, we've got some time still left for more questions. I am working through them as fast as I can. I'm not going to get through all of these questions, guys. I love it, absolutely love it. So please come back next week where I will have much more time to answer these questions if I don't yet get to yours. So, Butch Sebert says, how do you handle a player who often does something ridiculously goofy in the face of a serious situation? I've just released a video now called Are You Chaotic Stupid? And I think that was what it was called. And a player who does something ridiculously goofy in every situation, call them out on it. Just say, listen, I know that you want to have fun, and I think that you are having fun with that. Is that how you want to play the game moving forward? And another thing, as I always say, ask your fellow players, are they being bothered by this character's antics and the way that they handle things? If they are, then you are well within your rights to go to the GM and say, listen, is this something that you like? Is it something that you encourage? And if the GM says no, then you have to intercede. You have to go to that player and say, listen, we love the antics, but we want to play a serious game. And if we're going to carry on like this, then we're going to have to reassess the game and see whether we want to continue or not. You just sometimes have to flatline it and say, listen, you're a moron, change your tactics, because let's be honest, that's often the case. Zach Maples asks, why are you always sick? Well, yes, this year has been particularly bad. Last year was quite good. I think, Zach, what kicked it off was the trip. Well, no, let's put it this earlier. I'm under quite a lot of stress this year. There is so much happening, and guys, I wish I could share with you what is happening this year. It is mind-blowing what's going to be happening on the channel, and it's all thanks to you guys, all thanks to your support and the questions that you ask, and you constantly coming and watching the shows. I mean, there's 178 people watching the show, which was almost cancelled today. So it's all because of you, and I cannot share it with you just yet. I'm under an NDA. Thou shalt not speak its name. The contract is quite literally... let's hide that. There's the contract. It's literally been signed. I've been waiting for this now for 3 weeks. Where the hell is my signature? I actually even had to have people help me. So there is my signature waiting to go out. That's something that I was going to be doing today. It is so cool and so exciting and incredibly stressful. Added to that, I'm leaving Japan on the 25th of June. The date is now set. That's when I leave Japan for the USA. I'm in the USA for 2 months. I'm going to South Africa for 4 months, and I'm going to the UK permanently. So it's a hectic year. I've already been to the UK once this year. So lots of travel as well. And I think it was just a big knock. Anyway, so there we go. I appreciate the concern though, and the well wishes of getting better. I hate being sick. It is so unproductive. If I'm going to procrastinate, I want it to be on my terms. So then let's move on. So last few questions. Libby Mackenzie says, do you think it's okay for myself, the DM, to textually roleplay through Discord outside of weekly games for the players who seek it out? I never progressed the main story, but character development. Oh, I see. Okay, so you want to basically be able to roleplay with the same players and their characters, but not progress the actual story that the character's in. That can be tricky if you're doing it in the same time period. If it's flashback stuff, knock yourself out. Go wild. We saw in the Broken World Chronicles this week when I couldn't run the game, when Michael ran it, they did a flashback of Feloria's character where they explored her past, and it was brilliant. It was great. It really helped grow the character, to entrench the character. You, of course, as the GM or the DM, need to be careful not to give them items that they don't have access to anymore. You can give them items as long as you take those items away before they would return back to their relative timeline. So yes, absolutely, I think that's a great idea. Sarah De Gennaro asks, I wrote you a few weeks ago to ask you how much thought you think should go into planning alternative story directions based... Oh, yes, right. Sarah, thank you for asking this question. You did ask it on Facebook, and I said, please come and ask it here, so I do appreciate that. Now, yes, so how much alternative should you plan based on the player decisions and what they end up rolling? You know, I think that the challenge of trying to plan beyond the session that you're currently going into is folly. I think if you try and project too far into the future, there are too many variables to take into account. I'm going to point to the Kara Stones, so please stick around for that. Kara Stones this week was a classic example of, I had about probably 4 potential outcomes, but I did not know which one was going to happen. And the one that did happen, I have to say, I'm not sure if it was the right one, but it happened and it was beyond my control. So I had to go with it, and I had to make the best of it that I possibly could. I certainly did not project beyond that point. I never go beyond the next episode because it's just too much, too many variables. So there is that plan that I have, which I will bring up once we move into the Carol Stones review. There is the adventure planner, which outlines the adventures that I want my characters to go on to, but I don't go beyond that. So definitely don't burn yourself out trying to figure out all of the different pathways. It's just too much. It really is. So I hope that answers your question and was worth the wait, because you've been asking that question for quite some time. One last question while I'm busy set everything up. Zachary King asks, how would you run a game where the PCs are dragons? I would go to a Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition box module called the Council of Worms. And the Council of Worms was a module that was written very specifically for the players to be able to play dragons. And it was a wonderful module. The fold-outs inside of it alone were amazing. They even had an entire adventure series where they were dealing with dragon sort of council espionage and the like. So it's really worth checking out. I think you can even just get the PDF. I'm not sure, but it's well worth having a look at if you want to run a dragon game without a shadow of a doubt. I think it is definitely well worth looking into, because it handles so many of the more complicated questions that don't necessarily get handled, or at least you don't necessarily think about them. All right. Right, last question before I move on to Kara Stones. So where are we now? Brett Gittner asks, any tips to stay clear of the common orc plot lines, raiders, pillagers, blah blah blah? Want something new to use with my players? Well, there was that episode that came out a couple of weeks ago, Great GM, on looking at orcs from a different perspective, and we looked at them as Maoris or as Vikings or even as Aztecs. If you look at them as Maoris, where there's a canoe culture, or as Vikings, where there's the boat culture, something that you could certainly do is have the PCs become embroiled in an orc raid, where not the orcs are raiding, but the PCs join the orcs in a sea voyage, on a canoe race, for example. They come across this bend in the river, and there's this collection of orc tribes all hooting and cheering because there are basically canoe races going on. I would look at what is your orc culture to begin with. Then I would select something from that culture to then turn into an adventure. So I would say, all right, the orcs, in my world, the orcs all wear leopard skin print tights and are a throwback to the 1980s. something that I want to explore is the music culture. And you can then develop an adventure based on that. Maybe a drum of the lead drummer has been stolen, or there's a magic guitar that plays itself that gets stolen. There are all kinds of things that you can do. So that is my approach, how I would do that. So definitely look at that. Okay, guys, there are so many questions that come through. I'm still dealing with questions that you asked at 10:36. Let's go through the Kara Stones. If I get to the end of the Kara Stones and there's still some time, I will come back to these questions. So I'm not gonna. I don't know if I should do it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go all the way down to the bottom. Oh boy, good lord, there are so many questions that have come through today. This has been phenomenal, chaps. Really phenomenal. So yes, okay. I skipped your question. Next time, Ben. Next time, absolutely. Okay, now let's go to the Kara Stones. This contains spoilers for this week's episode. There are no spoilers for next week's episode because there isn't one. So if you have not yet watched the Kara Stones, that's on the Save or Dice channel, you should leave now if you intend to watch it, because this contains mega spoilers and it basically is the end of the campaign. So if you haven't yet watched it, adieu, farewell, so long, goodbye. Okay, let's look at the Kara Stones. That requires us... How is that working, Auntie Sue? There we go. That requires us to go there. Does this look familiar to everybody? Yes, it does, or it should by now. This is the entire plan for the Kara Stones, and I think I can say with a certain amount of confidence that we got through each and every one of these components that we planned to, and yes, we skipped a few, but we got through them in the end. And this plan here, I think I would not have been able to do the Kara Stones in the 22 episodes that I did it in if I had not had this plan. So originally Kara Stones was supposed to be 12 episodes long. Once we were in episode 4, the producers, that's Dave and Cody, said to me, double it, make it 24 episodes. So I said, okay, well, we'll make it as far as we can go. I'm not going to stretch it out. I'm going to make it too long. And we were playing around with time. Sometimes the party took quite a long time to get through things. Sometimes they moved through it quite quickly. So we were banking on 24 episodes. We got to 22. I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, we presented the gods, we presented the Predashar. The Predashar were a complete, I don't want to say failure, I don't want to say a waste of time. But the Predashar definitely were not as effective as I had hoped they would be. I'm just busy punching in a card here to add in a title for the Twitch guys. The Predashar were not nearly as powerful as I wanted to have them. They weren't as intimidating as I wanted them to have them, and it was, yeah, it was something that I didn't mind, because as so many people discovered, as I discovered, I didn't need to have a villain in this game. I did not need to have a villain in this game. The entire game, Draxus was on a knife edge as to whether he was going to work with the party or not. I have to say, in Michael's, not in his defense, but in his praise, that he was playing a loner character who worked with the party that he had been given because he realized that he needed them. So he worked with them, he went on their journeys, he went on their silly little side quests and things. He humored them because he needed them. When he created his character, he did not create his character to be inherently evil. He did not create his character to want to convert to the evil god. He created a character who had a run-in with an artifact, and the artifact wrote itself upon his scales. And that was kind of his Fey background. So it was a really cool idea. It evolved over time, and when there was that catastrophic moment where we were, it happened so early on. Where was it? It was just after the plan to save the world. The last shard, this race to the last shard, this one here, really threw things out in terms of the characters died. Barnabas and Valentin and Jenks died, ironically and beautifully, at the hands of Draxus. He was trying to save them and he ended up killing them. Now, what that then did was it introduced, of course, our two bards, and it introduced Gwen, the character. Now, there are lots of reasons why her character art remained the same. Cody and Dave, obviously, they commissioned character art for the show. That character art is not cheap. That character art is quite expensive to have manufactured. And so they had some background stuff, and the guys kind of chose what needed to happen and took it from there. So what was curious was how the story then progressed. Anyway, let's look at this last week's episode. This week's episode was supposed to be forge it in the core of the planet, the binding spell, race the location to stop it all, and then the climax. The forging in the core of the planet and the racing to stop it all felt to me to be too laborious. We had battle to get the mold of the heart and the tears of the goddess. Okay, there wasn't a battle there, but there was a lot of complications there. The removal of the shards. There had been a lot going on, and I decided, okay, race to stop it all, and the climax. It has to happen at the core. So with the core, when I designed the map, and I'm going to try and bring it up here so you can have a look at it, because I don't know how much you see of it during the actual game. And this is where things went visually wrong. If I bring it there, can you see it? No, you can't. But if I just go open, and I'm already in Karos Stones, and I go maps, and I open them up, there is the original map that I created. That is the forge. And so now I just see that Portentious has asked an interesting question, and I'm going to come to that in a little bit, because you're going to weep when you see what those items were. So this was my design for that space, and I mean, it is what it is. So this was how I designed it. They were supposed to move from one chamber to the next chamber to the next chamber to the next chamber, solving these riddles. Now, for me, I was torn about the riddles. Riddles can be very dangerous. They can slow the game down completely. They can drag out things that shouldn't be dragged out. They really, 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 really can slow things down. So I didn't want them to do that much. So I had what I thought were fairly simple riddles. I complicated the matter when they arrived, because I thought, well, maybe they're going to get through this too fast. Maybe they're going to get through this too fast. Now, I didn't want them to do that, so I then inserted the murals. Now, I love the idea of magic enhancing murals and art within a fantasy world. So the murals were all moving, and they were each telling a story. I have a list of all of the gods, plus their sort of representations and what they mean and the like. And so I was just making up these three stories. Now, I had also made, and you will have seen them, there they are there, as a matter of fact, the symbols that came up during the game. Oh, wrong way. So these symbols were basically me kind of going, right, well, I need a pacifist, I need a violent, and I need an internal solution to each of the different chambers. One thing I had done as a screw-up, which the players, they didn't raise it as players, they raised it in character, was that Lord Slythen had mentioned that there was a challenge of courage. And when I had created these four chambers, I forgot that. When I was drawing the map, I forgot that. So when I made these rune stones, I made knowledge, sacrifice, virtue, and honor. I had forgotten courage. And so what that did was it said, okay, great. So then this final section here, this actual central part, is not just going to be stand on the dais and forge the heart. That was my original plan. Once they had got through the 4 rooms, they were going to appear in these 4 different locations, and then they could forge the heart. The plan was that they could jump from one side to the other. Absolutely they could, and that would obviously start to undo the spell, hence needing to have all 5 of them there. The Manacles was a Lord Slythen introduction, and it was also because by this stage Draxus had started to talk to me and we had discovered that he was perhaps amiable to doing the work of Gashul. I have to say, Gashul has been a god that has served me so well throughout the 15 years that I have been using him. I have encountered players who refuse point blank to deal with Gashul. And I have encountered other players who are seduced by the dark side, and they get Gashul exactly what he wants, and they think they can manipulate him to have their own ends, and they fail miserably. This was a case where Draxus thought he could play the system. Oh, I'll put the god in power, but I want everything to go back the way that it was. The god even said, well, yes, it will go back to as it was with a few modifications, as in there aren't any other gods, as in my soldiers will be everywhere ensuring loyalty. So it's not exactly going back to the way it's gone. Anyway, so the murals I put in, and I put in the different gods and things to make this a more complicated puzzle so that it took them a little bit more time to get through. I did not write down what those murals were. I was making them up on the fly. I was literally going, okie dokie, this is virtue. Well, it's the violence, it's the shield, it's the axe, and then it's someone bowing down. Right, so god of this is defending, this one is attacking, and this one is bowing down. So I was just making it up on the fly, and of course the characters, the players then weren't taking note, they were just kind of going through the motions, and they solved this whole thing. So when they then had the challenge of the 4 portals, I had the intention that the 4 portals that appeared on the dioceses, it would be easy. They would look at them and they'd go, oh, I see. I am the responsible for honor. So how do I show honor to myself? Or, because I think that was what Dante's particular choice was, self-honor, that one has to believe that one has honor in order to be able to give honor to other people. So he could have sung a song about his people, he could have cut his own palm and sworn an oath to avenge the kids and everyone who was being attacked by the orcs. You know, there were many, many routes that he could go with. Again, if you watch my videos on riddles and things, I maintain that you do not have the solution. You have a ballpark of solutions of what you want to have, and when the players present you with one that kind of fits, you let them take it. You don't say, no, that's not how I solved it. So I was willing for him to do any of that. The players, however, didn't seem to get the idea that they could close the portals, at least not initially. They were sort of trying to get through them, they were throwing things through them. They were going to try and stop this orc army from killing the characters. Meanwhile, they knew that the final challenge was courage, because Draxus had said it so many times. So that was an interesting twist. Of course, then, Draxus started to write down the evil god's name. There were some dice rolls that prevented the other characters from learning about it. I was particularly surprised by Lionel and Dante having that kind of issue. It was very interesting to see that, but we're brothers, but I don't trust you, but this, but that. And I feel that Lionel, I know he felt betrayed by Dante. But in the same breath, this is a guy who has faked his own death twice and just run away from an obligation. So he isn't the most reliable of people. Whereas Draxus was consistent, even if he was consistently, it's all about me. So yes, that was very interesting. And then Gwen, Lauren and I had been kind of working through who Gwen really was, and we were starting to unpack that. I really solidified that she was the daughter of Brax. Her defiance was also awesome, absolutely awesome. So there was that question earlier, I think, that Sarah asked, how much do you plan for the outcome? You don't plan a huge amount. I did not see that she was going to defy her father. I saw her having a showdown with Draxus and the other 3 PCs having to choose sides. That's what I saw. All right, so there's some questions. I'm going to take a sip of cola here, and then I'm going to answer these questions. All right, so Ethan Denson says, hey, thank you so much for all your videos. They really helped me. I'm super glad to have that, Ethan. I wish this was a longer show today, but I have been told to keep it to less than an hour, or just under the hour. So we've got 15 minutes left. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your kind words. I really do appreciate them, I do. The Boardlich says, what if Draxus named the goddess who sacrificed herself to give everyone free will? He seemed to like her. Yes, he did. I think it was Rowan that he particularly liked. if he had done that, it would have been a very different outcome. Again, this is where I like to play it loose. So if he put Ro in there, that is about self-sacrifice to ensure the safety and the continuation and the defiance almost of the will. So from my perspective as the GM, if he had written Roan, Draxus would have died. He would have been absorbed into the heart, and the heart would have been placed into Roan, and Roan would have become the leader of the gods. Gashul would have been banished forever. Brax would have been put in his place. And it would have then been an extrapolation of trying to figure out how that was going to play out. Now, Draxus, well, Michael had got a hold of me earlier and said, look, he would really like it if whatever name he writes on the heart, the gods restore the space to how it was. So the story kind of went in a cyclical motion. We ended up back in that same tavern. I wasn't necessarily sold on that idea. To me, that kind of feels like everyone wakes up and it was just a dream. Going back in time is also something that I feel is it's an undoing of everything that has been done. So I would never, ever, it doesn't matter which god they chose, I would never, ever have them going back to the start as if nothing had happened before. That, to me, basically says everything you've been doing is a waste of time. So, yes, whichever god Draxus had written down, I would have had to, on the fly, figure out how that god would have taken, what that god would have done in terms of trying to keep the power of the god going. Jacob Collins asks, what would you recommend someone do if a long-running game got cancelled and you really enjoyed your character but knew that they would never see a proper ending? It is sad, Jacob. It's not particularly Carol Stone related, but yes, it is sad, and there are some things that you can do. Banking the character and then trying to bring them into another campaign, I don't know if that's going to work. The character and the campaign are often intertwined. Sometimes it is best just to leave the character. What you can do, and this is a trick that I learned a long time ago, if you like the character, why not then in the next campaign play the character's son or daughter or parent? The family line is there, the family traits are still there, it's the same family tree, but it's a different experience of coming to it with a different history, and that can make it kind of work quite well. Right. Okay, so Garen Strickland, bounce. Garen, no. How do you? Okay, so sorry. Gila Blue, GLA Blue, Gila Blue. How do you do riddles puzzles without completely halting the game until the players figure it out? I apologize if you already answered this and I missed it. So it is a good question, and the best thing, and I think you did miss it, is that the riddle needs to have an open-ended answer. So if the players are presented the riddle of bowing down to someone of authority, in this particular instance, the players had their characters bow down to Jenks, and she was in a position of authority, and so the spell worked. They could have had the characters bowing down to anything. They could have had the characters bowing down to the orcs attacking the family. It doesn't matter. It would simply have been thrown as a solution which fit within the parameters. Well, they were throwing spells through, they were trying this, they were trying that, it didn't really work. The red herring was when Jenks cast her dragon voice, it was amplified and closed the portal because dragon magic intimidation was part of what she had chosen. So, yeah, there we go. Right, Soke Samurai says, what do you think happened to Vankus's wife after the reboot? Well, you know, these reboots, oftentimes you go, oh, it's so happy they can go back and do it. They need to go and save her. She's going to get sacrificed. Except that Gashul banished all other gods. So that means that perhaps her entire people, if they get out to that floating jungle island, those pyramids would be dedicated to Gashul. Gashul is about destruction, not sacrifice. He doesn't care about if you sacrifice yourself. As long as you're obliterated, that's what he cares about. So you might find that she's become this great priestess who presides over this magical portal that just obliterates their victims, and they use it to maintain control. I mean, it can be a lot of fun. It really, really, really can be a lot of fun to do those kind of things. So There we go. I'm just looking for Carostone questions at the moment. That's not Carostones. Not Carostones. Not seeing Carostone questions. Okay, so Drax has finally realized the power of our great Lord Jenks. Yeah, well, I think he solved the problem and decided, well, this is how he gets to move forward. Oh yes, the Lizard Man items. Let me bring those up so that you can see that I'm not completely gaga. I was very amused, and you know, oftentimes I get where is it now? No, we will. I will just have to go and find it. Okay, give me a second. I'm often amused when people say, "Oh, we never get magical items." Ah, you don't get magical items, do you? That's interesting. So we are just going to Carostones. Removal of the shards. Okay, so I don't know how to show this to you. Oops, what's going on there? Let's see. Give me a second here. Which one is that one? That's this one here. Okay, perfect. Transition. These are my very basic notes for the removal of the shards, but then they said, okay, well, you know, here's some rewards for you. So these are the rewards that I gave them, and I think they're pretty damn good rewards. I'll make it big so you guys can see it behind me. The skull that was given. This drinking skull is the skull of a curious deer. A diminutive animal, the Thedanbuck might be thought of as easy prey. However, when attacked, the Thedanbuck can turn itself into a gigantic monster, changing from its original height of 2 feet at the shoulder to nearly 8 feet at the shoulder. Its multi-tined horns would enlarge from a few inches to 12 feet in length. The symbols carved into the skull make the skull still work, as it did when the Thedanbuck was alive. Any liquid in the skull increases accordingly. The skull turns from a standard pint-holding mug into a 4-gallon drum, yet weighs the same. Anyone who attunes to the skull by becoming drunk from drinking from it can order the skull to refill once per day. So it's a kind of nice magical item. It's nothing major. It's not going to change the game. It's not going to destroy anything. The feather. This was the feather of the Eric bird, a massive carnivorous monster that from the Terrasphere, it had a platinum tip added to it. The tip is engraved with Elvish. The Elvish is a command word. Anyone who writes the command word on a piece of paper with the quill can speak any language and understand any language. This was a mega one. I should have added in there for the duration of an hour or something like that. Very, very powerful. They never bothered to check these things. The pearl appears to be full of water, and when stared at, the water looks like a raging ocean. The faint smell of the sea follows the pearl. This pearl was known in times of old as Jadrikan's curse. Jadrikan was a powerful wizard who single-handedly exterminated the entire merfolk race of Ka before the Sundering. We never really handled merfolk, so Ka has lost the merfolk and the halflings. I forgot about that. The pearl is said to have focused its terrible evil and was instrumental in annihilating the entire race. Anyone holding the pearl can breathe underwater. When merfolk, which is highly unlikely, are nearby, the pearl releases a plague that affects only merfolk, killing them in 1d4 turns. It's a bit of an old relic there. The necklace, the red skulls, they come from the Toshiakian kingdom. Yeah, the wearer allows the wearer to safely travel into the realms of Elysiae, which is the realms of the dead. When the skulls are touched by the living, the voice of the dead from whom the necklace was made can be heard. The voice recounts their life. In this case, the dead was Yoshi Takana, a great woman. Her life was full of hardship and talks of the moment a car exploded. So wonderful opportunity. And then for bankers, the bones of the legs of dwarves, not any dwarves, the 4 brothers, Kuv Kavat, prophets of the first age. The bones are 1,000 years old. They are in fact relics of extreme power. So there were the magical items. There were all these wonderful magical items that could have been used, and they didn't even bother to check. So yeah, they got them. They got them. But yeah, didn't use them. Didn't use them. Now, any other questions for Carostone? Do you keep track of your adventures by relying on your memory only? Do you discuss recap before beginning again as well as after? No, I make notes. Carol Stone's my notes were all made in World Anvil, as well as that Word document that you saw. If I need to make, if there's complicated things that come through, I will make those kind of notes, but not vast amounts of notes. And yes, we definitely discussed the show a little bit beforehand. Hey guys, what was happening this morning? And someone goes, well, I got a piece of toast stuck in the toaster. And it's like, well, why do you put toast in a toaster? Because that's not what you put into a toaster. You put bread into a toaster and you take toast out of the toaster. Anyway, that's a whole different ball game. But yes, it was interesting. The keeping track is important, and if you don't do it properly, you are in trouble. So if you go to World Anvil, you'll see there's lots of spaces where it says, what have you seeded, what did you seed, and that's specifically for you to be able to write down your notes and take it from there. Okay, so that's Karos. House of Blues asks the question, what was your experience with working with so many experienced players that might run drastically different games than you? What were the clashes or unexpected hiccups? I don't think there were any clashes ever. I absolutely loved working with all of the different cast members. Lauren didn't have a huge amount of experience as a player, and certainly none as a GM. Mike has been running games on Twitch for a long time. Yes, Dave and Cody and Jacob are all very good GMs and players as well. So it wasn't so much clashes. I think it was more about being able to sit back and enjoy and watch what was going on and know that although the 4 of them or 5 of them are trying to kill each other, they're not going to actually do it. They've got each other's backs as storytellers, but the characters are free to go and get angry and argue and all sorts of wonderful things. So it was a real pleasure. And I think that playing with GMs or playing with people who are both GM and player is a lot easier if you are a good GM. If you can handle that pressure of them knowing how they would take the story, because their GMs are naturally going to be working it out, then yes, if you can handle it, then I think they make the best kinds of players, because they know what you're trying to do, so they can help you along a little bit. If they help too much, then they backseat GMs, and you don't want that either. So yes, there we go. It was a lot of fun. I look forward to the next one. I'm not GMing it, I'm playing in it. Yeah, so there you go. Anyway, now we're pretty much on time. There are not a lot more Carol Stone questions coming through. As a conclusion, you know, I always try and hit the 5 C's. And I think we got there. It was challenging. It was climatic. It had moments where there was absolute chaos going on. Nobody knew where it was going. Nobody knew what was going to happen, including myself. And I think that and it brings about change. So I think that was all present there. And I really liked that. And the guys made it happen. Do you plan to run a long campaign online? Well, Lester, I have been running a long game online. It's called The Adventures of the Windswift. It's been going for 2 years now. It's also getting to the point where we're getting to the finale for that. That is a huge amount of work in terms of just the sheer hours that one can get into there. I think the next step for me, 24 is actually a pretty good one. I think 24 episodes or 24 blocks, I think works quite nicely for online, because that is what's 24. It's mind blank 6 months worth of playing, so it's an interesting space. To do longer means that there is issues with people joining halfway through and the like. Cody Patton says, what is the longest game you have ever run? How about played? So the longest game I've ever run as a GM would... The Windswift is getting there in terms of run consistently, but my games didn't run more than a year and a half. If only because usually I was playing with people who were like myself, not necessarily based in the city, or they were there for a short contract period and then they would leave. So Yeah, you know, and it also depends on your definition of campaign as well. So there's definitely that. Stephen Ryder, yes, we have run out of time. The 5 C's I will go through next week if you remind me to take you through what those 5 C's are. Anyway, guys, I appreciate your support. 147 people stayed with us throughout this entire show. I would love to do another hour, but I can feel that my voice is getting really scratchy already. So there we go. I would encourage you all to go and have fun this weekend. If it's just starting for you, if, like for me, it's halfway over already, go and have fun. Thank you again for your support and for being part of this channel. And I cannot wait to reveal what's going to be coming up later on in the year. Until then, however, I want to say to you and yours and everybody else, the happiest and the most delightful, the most wonderful of gaming experiences.